Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. This is episode 3 of the Free Rider podcast. I'm Oliver and I'm here with Michael and Brenden.
Salutations.
Hello?
And today we'll be talking about the filibuster and how that plays a role in making a law. So, in the Senate, a filibuster is an attempt to delay or block a vote on a piece of legislation or a confirmation. This is mainly used as a legislative branch is known as a slower branch, slower than the executive and the judicial. Now, the filibuster is not in the Constitution, which provides a debate of whether this process is constitutional or unconstitutional, and if it should stay or can be abolished. Now, the simple majority of a Senate discussion is 51 votes, but the filibuster makes the effective threshold to pass a law of 60 Senate votes, and which is known as cloture. Now, with this could cause a lot of more laws to not be passed, as this cloture is unlimited time. This filibuster is unlimited time, and the senator can talk for as much time as possible, and if they do not reach these 60 votes, then the law will not be passed. This has been seen with Ted Cruz, who did not have much else to discuss when trying to filibuster a law, but instead he just read Green Eggs and Ham by Dr. Seuss, and
Classic.
This allowed the law to not be passed. So I kind of wanted to ask a couple questions to Michael and Brenden here, and I wanted to ask, is the filibuster unconstitutional? What do you guys think?
Well, as you mentioned, it's not in the Constitution, but I mean, if you're asking whether or not it's a democratic or anti-democratic process, I think it depends a lot on which side you're going to ask, because the side that holds the majority in the Senate is obviously always going to say that, whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats, depending on the time, the side that holds the majority in the Senate is obviously always going to say, the filibuster is anti-democratic. It undermines the rule of the Senate, where, a simple majority is needed for something to pass the Senate. But the side that's in the minority at the time, of course, is always going to argue the opposite, which is that a simple majority, leads to a quote-unquote tyranny of the majority situation. So a higher threshold should be necessary with 60 votes rather than 51 to end a filibuster. And so the minority side is always going to see those filibustering to block the majority as a hero, while the majority will obviously villainize those who take advantage of the filibuster against them.
Yeah, I would say to the question, is it unconstitutional? No, I don't think it certainly doesn't contradict anything in the Constitution. There's nothing in the Constitution about filibuster. But I would say that it does kind of fall in line with a lot of constitutional ideals of checks and balances of power. And in that it gives the minority party ability to fight against a majority party that they thought was acting too much, doing too much. I think in reality, it just means a lot less stuff gets done. It means that a lot of more controversial or extreme laws or bills that are proposed don't pass, even if it were the will of a majority of Americans or the majority of congressional representatives. It can be blocked. So I do think that there is an argument that it can be anti-democratic. You see that there's a lot of bills that have been filibustered that the majority of Americans have polled and said they would want to be passed. So is that going against the will of the majority of people, perhaps? But certainly it's not unconstitutional in that, the Constitution kind of is built to have some of these stalemates, these kind of blocks on things happening in part to protect the people from a government that was overreaching its powers.
Yeah, and I think I completely agree that it can sometimes be, a complete horror show. Like I think, Oliver, you mentioned there's that famous video of Ted Cruz reading Green Eggs and Ham on the Senate floor, and the Senate, still it was clearly a filibuster. but it sort of reached a ridiculous height, and the Senate still, failed to garner the 60 votes to end the filibuster.
And that leads to my point: is this majority unfair? Is this changing from a simple majority to a 60 vote threshold a little unfair? Because knowing this country now, it is a little polarized, and it is difficult to even
understatement.
Yeah, it is a little understatement, but it's difficult to get this simple majority even now. So is this 60 vote threshold unfair?
Well, again, as I mentioned before, it depends which side you ask. The majority will always think that the filibuster, raising the requirement for the effective threshold necessary to pass a law, they'll always say it's unfair. The minority will always say, it's protecting the minority from the tyranny of the majority.
Yeah. I do think that it's important to bring up this kind of back and forth battle of precedent that we see between Democrats and Republicans, specifically following the 2013 move where Democrats lowered the cloture threshold during Obama's administration for the nominees they were trying to pass through, and that after they set that precedent that for these nominees they could effectively change the way government was structured, the way government acted, lowering the cloture threshold. Now you see with the nomination of Gorsuch, the Supreme Court, that Republican senators then lowered the threshold again. So you kind of have this back and forth of, changing rules. And I think that, it is a dangerous precedent to set in the minds of people who are looking for political stability and adhering to constitutional and democratic precedent. But at the same time as well, I think the pure Democrat in me would say that if you get a majority of votes for something, it's a majority and you got it. So I don't know if the supermajority is actually reasonable or democratic, right, to your point, fair.
So yeah, I think also that it was intended in theory to be like, okay, passing laws is very important. It can affect the nation greatly. So these are things that need to take time. That's why the legislative branch is the slowest branch that we know. And the thing is, yeah, we were giving the whole point of the filibuster is to give more time for the debate to make sure that they are making the right decision that will ultimately affect the society that we live in.
But it increases public awareness as well if there's a particular issue, and
Indeed.
Have that filibuster process. It becomes a news story and the public knows about a bill that they might have known about before.
Right, but is it too slow? It is a slow process already, the legislative branch, but is this added debate too slow? Or is it the right amount of time in order to make these laws?
Well, as you said, the Senate is intentionally the slow chamber, right? There's this, I think, common phrase. I may be incorrect, but I think there's this a common saying that the Senate is the cooling saucer. Like when you heat up the tea, and then it's too hot, you pour it out into the saucer to cool. So the Senate is supposed to, act as an anti function, I guess, to the supposed passions of the House. But is it too slow? I think it's difficult. Again, it's difficult to come up with an answer to that's going to be consistent on both sides of the two-party system throughout time, especially as Brenden mentioned, they alternate holding the majority within the Senate. So, if there were a perfect, ideal answer, it would be a good thing. It would be scrumptious. Maybe that's not the best choice of verbiage. It would be ideal. The ideal solution is what I meant to say. I'm not sure if that was the right word, but of course there isn't, because it's a very complicated political process.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. It just depends on the side, and one might say it's too slow, but others would be like, this is the perfect amount of time because I do not want this law passed. And yeah, it could be scrumptious, as you said before. I'm not
That was not the right word. I'm sorry.
But yeah, it could be too slow. It could be just the right amount of time. But again, if someone like Ted Cruz is reading green eggs and ham.
Yeah, you gotta wonder, is that functioning government?
You know, it is getting to a point where it's ridiculous. Maybe there should be something where, like, if you do not have anything to say about that law specifically or anything on the details or information about what the law says, what the bill says that will be passed, then you're not allowed to speak on that issue.
And I mean, to me, it becomes like, is the procedure of it necessary? Do you actually need to be talking, filling up the space, or can you just say like, hey, we all would want to filibuster this? You know, I'll make a comparison to baseball, where there's the intentional walk in baseball, and there used to be a rule where to intentionally walk a batter, you had to pitch 4 balls way outside, and the catcher would just catch it, and then they take their base. And then to speed up the game, they decided, well, now the pitcher can just signify intentional walk, and then the batter gets its base. Right. So I wonder if there could be something similar where, you know, you just signify, hey, we're gonna filibuster this, we don't want this to pass, and then maybe you can move to what would be the end of the filibuster, whether or not you have the cloture vote, rather than actually just forcing this extreme, waited period.
Yeah, but as well as we were talking about the Constitution, and although it is not specifically in the Constitution, is this something that, I'm asking you guys, is this something that the Founding Fathers wanted, or is this something that they were kind of not, the reason why they didn't put it in the Constitution is because they didn't see that this was a process that they wanted?
Frankly, I don't think it's something that they could have anticipated or even really thought about. I think that it's, like I said before, I think that it's in line with constitutional ideals of like checks and balances of power, protecting minorities from tyrannical majorities, as Michael was saying. But I also don't think that they would have intended someone to just be in the Senate chamber, you know, reading a children's book in order to postpone a law passing that people maybe were even, a majority of people were even pro, or, you know, wanted to happen. So I don't think that they intended it in its current form, but in its ideals, I do think it's in line with a lot of the Constitution.
Yeah, I agree entirely with what Brenden is saying. And I think that that's true not just in the case of the filibuster, but in general. This is sort of an argument or question that's raised by a lot of people on a lot of different topics. You know, is this what the Founding Fathers wanted? And I think Brenden is right. The Founding Fathers couldn't possibly have anticipated the society we live in today.
Yeah. And to close off, final question, it's a theme of our podcast. Do we see this being abolished anytime soon? Do we have any right means to abolish this?
I actually think yes. I think that there is a pretty big growing movement to abolish the filibuster, especially among younger and more liberal politicians. And I think that as politics continue, or the Democratic Party continues to shift left, I think that more and more people will be in favor. And I see it, even within our current structure, I see it perhaps gaining a supermajority at some point in our lifetime, but I don't think in the next few elections, certainly. I think it would take some time, but I see it happening. I see it certainly happening more likely than term limits or abolishing electoral college. I'll put it that way. Not necessarily probable, but more likely than the other two.
I'm not so sure because, well, first of all, what needs to happen for the filibuster to be abolished? Would it be a Senate vote?
Yeah, it would be a Senate vote and most likely a House of Representatives vote, from my understanding.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
And they might need a supermajority for it to happen.
Right. You might filibuster the filibuster.
Yeah, it becomes a kind of
They almost
paradox.
certainly would. Yes. So, well, first of all, the party in power would have to have a supermajority, and also they would have to decide, that they're going to risk not putting the handlebrakes in place for the future of where they're not going to have a majority. So I think it's possible, but it's not probable by my estimation.
Okay. That was a great debate, guys. Thank you for joining me. This was episode 3 of the Free Rider podcast, and
Thank you for hosting, Oliver.
It was a pleasure.